somewhere in Eurasia, a Neanderthal met a Homo sapiens, and they had children. That means our ancestors didn't simply walk into Neanderthal territory, fight them, and move on. Sometimes, they connected. And those encounters left a permanent mark on human history. Today, people whose ancestry comes mostly from outside Africa typically carry around 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. That might sound tiny, but think about what that actually means. Somewhere inside your genome, there are fragments of a human who lived tens of thousands of years ago. A person whose name we'll never know, whose face we'll probably never see, but part of their DNA survived, because their children survived, and their children's children, and thousands of generations after them. That's an insane time capsule. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Not every Neanderthal gene was equally useful to us. Some variants that entered modern human populations appear to have affected things like immune responses, skin biology, and adaptation to new environments. In other words, when our ancestors entered Eurasia, they weren't starting completely from scratch. They were picking up genetic information from people who had already been living there for hundreds of thousands of years. It's almost like arriving in a new country and discovering the locals already have the survival manual. But if Neanderthals and Homo sapiens could live alongside each other, and even have children together, why did one population eventually disappear? That's the mystery. Because the old story was simple. We arrived. They lost. We survived. But real history is rarely that clean. Maybe climate played a role. Maybe their populations were smaller. Maybe our larger social networks gave Homo sapiens an edge. Maybe diseases moved between populations. Maybe competition mattered. Or maybe it was a combination of all of them. And there's another possibility that's easy to miss. Maybe Neanderthals didn't simply vanish. Maybe some of them became part of us. Because when you look at human history through DNA, extinction starts to look a lot less like a clean ending, and a lot more like an absorption. But there's still one huge question. If Neanderthals and Homo sapiens were close enough to have children, what happened to the other human populations? Because Neanderthals weren't the only ones we met. And one of those other humans left behind an even stranger genetic mystery. Imagine walking through Europe 50,000 years ago. You'd hear the wind, the crackle of a distant fire, maybe the footsteps of something huge moving through the trees. And then you'd see them, a group of humans. But they wouldn't look quite like us. Their bodies were shorter and massively built. Their shoulders were broad. Their arms were powerful. And above their eyes sat a heavy brow ridge. These were Neanderthals. And here's the part that sounds almost impossible today. They weren't alone either. At the same time, other human species were living across Asia. Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, and probably other populations we haven't even identified yet. For hundreds of thousands of years, Earth wasn't occupied by just one kind of human. It was a world of different humans, all trying to survive. Neanderthals had already been around for an incredibly long time. They survived brutal ice ages. They hunted enormous animals. They made sophisticated stone tools. They controlled fire. And when someone in their group was badly injured, they didn't simply leave them behind. Some survived injuries that would have been impossible to survive alone. Someone had to care for them. Someone had to bring them food. Someone had to keep them alive. So forget the old image of the dumb caveman. That picture is seriously outdated. Neanderthals weren't stupid. They were survivors. And they had something else in common with us. They had big brains. In some cases, even larger than ours. But brain size wasn't the thing that made our story different. Because somewhere in Africa, another human population was changing. Homo sapiens, our ancestors. They were smaller and more lightly built. But they had something that could become incredibly powerful. Connections. They could cooperate across larger social networks. Share knowledge. Move ideas. Exchange technology. And spread into completely new environments. Then roughly 50,000 years ago, our ancestors pushed deeper into Eurasia, and eventually, they entered Neanderthal territory. Think about that moment. Two human species, meeting face to face for the first time. They probably didn't know they were looking at another species. They just saw humans. And here's the mystery. For thousands of years, these two populations lived in overlapping worlds. Sometimes they may have competed. Sometimes they may have avoided each other. And sometimes, they got much closer. Because the evidence hidden inside modern human DNA tells us something extraordinary. Some Neanderthals and Homo sapiens had children together. Which means the story wasn't simply, we arrived and they disappeared. Something much stranger happened. Part of them became us. And that's going to completely change the way we think about extinction. Because if Neanderthals vanished, why can we still find them inside ourselves? And even more importantly, what happened when the last different humans on Earth began disappearing? For a long time, scientists pictured Neanderthals as humanity's awkward cousins. Heavy brow, big nose, slouched posture. Not exactly the guy you'd want designing your next skyscraper. But that image was wrong. And the more we discover about Neanderthals, the harder it becomes to call them primitive. Take their bodies. A Neanderthal wasn't built like a modern marathon runner. They were compact, extremely muscular, with powerful arms and broad chests. That body was basically a survival machine for Ice Age Europe. Cold weather, rough terrain, close-range hunting, and enormous prey. Because Neanderthals weren't sitting around eating berries all day. They hunted animals that could seriously mess you up. Woolly rhinoceroses, wild horses, bison, and sometimes mammoths. Imagine getting close to one of those things, with nothing but Stone Age weapons. That's not a hunting trip. That's a terrible life decision. And their skeletons tell us just how dangerous it was. Neanderthal bones often show healed fractures and other serious injuries. But here's the fascinating part. Some of those people survived, which means somebody helped them. Someone brought them food. Someone protected them. Someone stayed. That's not just survival. That's social behavior. And it gets even more interesting. Neanderthals appear to have deliberately buried some of their dead. Scientists still debate exactly what those burials meant. Were they spiritual, practical, ritual? We don't know. But the possibility that they intentionally buried their dead tells us something important. These weren't mindless animals. They had relationships. They had communities. And they probably had their own way of understanding the world. Then there's their technology. Neanderthals developed sophisticated stone tools long before Homo sapiens arrived in many parts of Europe. They controlled fire. They used animal hides. They worked wood. And in some places, they appear to have used adhesives to combine different materials into tools. That's a big deal. Because making a tool like that means you're not just thinking about what's happening right now. You're thinking several steps ahead. Find the materials. Prepare them. Combine them. Then use the finished tool. That's planning. And planning requires a brain capable of imagining something before it exists. But here's where things get even more interesting. Neanderthals weren't just physically similar to us. Their brains may have supported surprisingly complex behavior too. We can't hear their voices. We can't watch them tell stories around a fire. Their language is gone. Their thoughts are gone. All we have are clues. Their anatomy suggests they were capable of producing complex sounds. And they carried a version of a gene called FOXP2. It's important for speech and language in modern humans. But FOXP2 isn't some magic language gene. Having it doesn't automatically mean someone could speak like us. So we have to be careful. Maybe Neanderthals had language. Maybe it sounded completely different from ours. Maybe they communicated using sounds, gestures, rhythm, and shared experiences. We simply don't know. And honestly, that's what makes this so fascinating. We're trying to reconstruct the mind of another human species, using scraps of bone, stone, and dirt. Yet the evidence keeps pointing in the same direction. Neanderthals weren't just surviving. They were adapting. They were learning. They were caring for each other. And they had already been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years. So if they were this capable, why did we become the last humans standing? Because eventually, our two worlds collided. And when Homo sapiens entered Neanderthal territory, we didn't just bring new tools. We brought something far more powerful. More humans. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals had Europe pretty much to themselves. Then something changed. Our ancestors started moving out of Africa. And they didn't stop. They crossed deserts, grasslands, mountains, and eventually, they reached the same world Neanderthals called home. Think about that moment. Two different human populations, standing in the same landscape, neither one knowing what was about to happen. And here's the wild part. This wasn't some one-time encounter. Our ancestors and Neanderthals appear to have crossed paths repeatedly, for thousands of years. Their worlds overlapped. They may have competed for the same animals, the same caves, the same water, the same territory. But competition wasn't the whole story, because their DNA tells us something much more surprising. So why are we the only humans left? Did Homo sapiens simply outcompete everyone else? It sounds simple, but human evolution was anything but simple. Different human populations were spread across Africa, Europe, and Asia. They faced different climates, different animals, different diseases, and different survival problems. Then our species started spreading across the planet, and wherever we went, the human world got smaller. Neanderthals disappeared from Europe. Denisovan populations disappeared as distinct groups. Homo floresiensis eventually vanished from its island world. But did we wipe them out? There's no smoking gun. No ancient battlefield proving Homo sapiens hunted every other human to extinction. Instead, the evidence points toward something much messier. Climate change could reshape entire ecosystems. Food sources could disappear. Populations could become isolated. And when numbers get small, even a few bad generations can hit hard. Then there's competition. Two human groups don't need to fight every day to compete. If both need the same animals, the same caves, the same water, even a small advantage can matter. And Homo sapiens may have had one enormous advantage. Connections. More connected groups can share tools, share information, find new resources, and recover faster when one area gets hit by disaster. But here's the twist. Some of these disappearing humans didn't simply vanish. They left pieces of themselves behind. DNA, genes, fragments of their history, inside us. So maybe extinction wasn't always a clean here one day, gone the next. Sometimes, a population disappears as a separate people, while parts of it survive inside another population. And that changes the question completely. Maybe Homo sapiens didn't simply replace every other human. Maybe we sometimes competed with them, sometimes mixed with them, sometimes absorbed them, and sometimes we simply outlasted them. So if that's what happened, there's one huge mystery left. Why did Homo sapiens have the advantage in the first place? Because the answer may not be hidden in our muscles, or even our brains. It may be hidden in something much more powerful, the way we connected with each other. So, are we really the only humans left? Technically, yes. Homo sapiens is the only human species still alive today. But here's the strange part. We aren't completely alone. Because inside modern humans, there are genetic traces of people who are gone. Neanderthal DNA survives in people with ancestry outside Africa. Denisovan DNA survives in some populations too. And that means something incredible happened. These humans didn't simply disappear from the story. Parts of their story became part of ours. Think about that. A Neanderthal who lived tens of thousands of years ago could have had a child with one of our ancestors. That child survived. Then their child survived. And another. And another. For thousands of generations. Until eventually, a tiny piece of that ancient person's DNA ended up in someone alive today. Maybe even you. So when we say, the Neanderthals went extinct, that's true in one sense. But it's also incomplete. Their populations disappeared as separate human groups. Their languages disappeared. Their cultures disappeared. Their worlds disappeared. But some of their genes survived. Inside us. And that may be the biggest lesson from the entire story. Human evolution wasn't a straight line. It wasn't one species marching forward, while everything else failed behind it. It was messy. Branches split. Populations moved. Groups collided. Some disappeared. Some mixed. And some survived by becoming part of something new. Which brings us back to the question. Are we the only humans left? Yes. There's only one human species walking around today, but for most of our history, that wasn't normal. We lived alongside other humans for hundreds of thousands of years. We shared landscapes. We competed. We adapted. And sometimes, we loved. Eventually, all those other human worlds faded away, leaving just one, us. And maybe that's the strangest part. We're used to thinking of extinction as something that happens to them. But every human alive today belongs to a species that once lived alongside others, and somehow became the last one standing. So the next time you look at another human, remember this. You're not looking at the end of the human story. You're looking at the only branch of it that survived. And the real mystery isn't, why did they disappear? It's this, why did we survive?